Hi there. This is Dr. Joy Brooke Fairfield. I teach in the Media Studies program at Rhodes College. I was so looking forward to giving you this talk in person today, but the weather gods didn't smile upon us. So I'm going to do a video recording of an edited version for you to check out at home if this was one of the topics you're interested in studying. This short talk is called Pencils Down, Fists Up, Writing for TV and the WGA Strike. So let's just dive right into it. How about? So first in this talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about writing for television, some of the norms and traditions we have in professional TV writing. I'm going to talk about writers' rooms, about this idea of sort of breaking the story as a group, and then about kind of the hierarchical relationships of showrunners, EPs, some of the different roles. I'm going to end talking a little bit about diversity in TV writing and how important and significant that is at this moment and, of course, going forward. The second half of the talk is looking a little bit more at the specific circumstances of the Writers Guild of America being on strike, which it has been now for almost 2 months since the beginning of May. About this strike, I'm going to talk sort of some of the past and history about Hollywood strikes, and then I'm going to talk about the present issue and just briefly touch on the future and what might happen next. Okay, so moving on forward. This is a writer's room. This is a kind of classic picture of a 1970s behind the scenes writer's room for Second City TV, which was actually a comedy TV show shot in Toronto. This is just a picture that I found on Twitter. I think it may have indeed been staged, but there's something that I love about this image. You know, this is a long time ago before I was even born. A group of writers in a room together trying to come up with some funny things to say. You see some anachronistic things like the cigarettes on the table. They wouldn't have that in a TV writer's room today. But then you see some other things exactly the same, like the little cards taped to the wall or attached to the wall where writers could move around different bits that they'd be doing at different times. Here's a BBC drama writer's room more contemporarily. You can see the light streaming in from the windows on a bunch of writers around the table looking at scripts and notebooks. Here's some clips from a video of the executive producer of a TV show called Outlander giving a tour around his writer's room. So this writer's room is appointed with comfy chairs, which looks nice, and some maps indicating some of the regions related to the TV show as sort of inspiration and guidance. Along the top of the wall, you can see a timeline through which the story is unfolding. And then over there on the whiteboard, you can see as he's demonstrating there are different scenes that can be moved around magnetically from one to the other. This is how writers work together in a room, sort of brainstorming. Here's another example I love. They didn't have the magnetic ones. This is from the TV show called Happy Endings. That's executive producer Jonathan Groff there in the middle. And you'll see in different colors, different ideas, plot lines, ABC stories weaving through not only each episode, but the whole season all the way long. So my last image with some ideas about sort of what executive producers do. This is the executive producer of the popular TV show Breaking Bad. So there's this role that is sometimes called showrunner, which is the person kind of in charge of both the writing and the producing of the show. And then the higher term or more formal term is also executive producer. So often these rooms are led by one charismatic writer as a sort of EP or showrunner, but the rooms historically as small as 6, but even up to 12. And this is for everything from comedy to drama to late night TV shows. Even reality TV shows have writers' rooms. Unlike playwrights, who normally work alone, TV writing is really historically collective. All right, so moving forward a little bit, this is the sort of general process of how writing happens in a TV writer's room. And again, this is just very brief, but I wanted to give you an outline. So first, the writer's room is assembled. Usually the executive producer or showrunner has some choice in that. And the group is assembled, they get their contracts from the organization and they start working on a project. At the beginning, there's often a kind of what they call a blue sky phase and a brainstorming time when everyone gets to throw out a lot of different ideas, but time is always ticking. So pretty quickly, writers get down to what they call breaking the season. Breaking is a good thing in writing for TV. Breaking means to figure out all of the plot beats that move the characters through their sort of journey or dramatic arc through the TV show or the season. So you can break a season into sort of major tentpole plot elements. You can break a episode, and then you can even break down, oh, what are the specific, you can break a relationship arc as well within a TV show, within an individual episode. Sometimes there's group writing where everybody writes together. There's also moments when the screenwriter gives specific assignments to individual writers to go do different elements of the episode or season. There's often an A room or a B room where the A room is working on structure and the B room will be working on jokes or specific elements that need more attention. Beating the joke, this term, there's a lot of funny lingo that happens in this world. Beating the joke is to come up with a lot of different options. Sometimes that's called alts. So the B room will often work on alts or sort of better jokes for the episode. Each episode has to have a story broken. That's sort of where they make the cards and figure out what's going to happen in between each act of the show. TV shows are still structured around a kind of 3-act structure most of the time, sometimes 5 acts or less, but still a pretty formal structure. Even though there's no longer commercials in a lot of streaming TV shows, they're still structured around the TV advertising timeline. An outline is created, and then before they even get to making a full script, both the network and the studio have to give notes on that outline. Finally, a writer or writers will turn an outline into a production draft. Sometimes if a lot of different people are working on that, it'll be thought of as a kind of Frankenstein draft. That one's shared in the writer's room. Then more notes go to the writer or writers working on that episode. And then when they get the next draft ready, and this is all happening over really a short period of time, there'll be a table reading with the actors, who can also then have a note giving process that must be done before finally getting to rehearse and shoot the show, ideally with writers present. So before I move on, I wanted to show one more example of a writer's room. This is from The Simpsons in 1990. I think this is a great example because they don't have any laptops with them. This was before the real use of laptops. In this kind of mode of writing. And if we were in person, I would take this moment to ask you what you notice about this writer's room, or what you see. And we might talk about, some of the images of the Simpsons on the wall. We might talk about what they have on the table, their notebooks, coffee. I think maybe they're smoking. I can't tell if that's an ashtray there on the left. But I think the other thing that we'd probably come to is this sure does look like a room of a lot of white guys, and that's really true for a lot of the history of television writing. Television writing emerged from a couple other entertainment industries in the US. It didn't just like spring from nothing, right? TV emerged from the kind of vaudeville circuit, radio circuit, a little bit music industry, a little bit, opera, other kinds of cultural industries. But a lot of it was also advertising. It was just straight up from advertising. So sometimes you'll look at pictures of advertising rooms and TV comedy writers' rooms, and it'll look like the same sort of people kind of running forward the kind of business element as well as the creative element together. So obviously a lot of people are trying to study this, and there's a lot of movements to try to diversify writers' rooms today. The first thing we have to do, of course, is study it. So for a long time, these things weren't even studied, so there wasn't data about it. But there's better data now. So this is from the Hollywood Diversity Report in 2021, and this is looking at show creators or executive producers, showrunners, the sort of bigwig leaders of a TV show broken down by gender. And of course, despite the basically 50-50 gender ratio of our country and the world, there's 75.9% show creators men and just 24% women. So still just getting into the kind of upper regions of TV producing as a woman is tricky. Of course, and also even sort of trickier for people of color. And you look at this graph, I really appreciate they both gave you the numbers for show creators by race for broadcast scripted TV show over the past decade, looking at showrunners that are white versus showrunners that are of a minority racialized population. And I like that they put down the center that US population graph to remind us of the vast difference between the amount of people in the country who are, Black and brown and indigenous, who are not white, who are considered minorities, versus the amount of sort of power they have in telling their stories on TV. There's another great report called The Color of Change Writers' Room that talks about how many people of color are in writers' rooms specifically. And this looks into both kind of general numbers within the field. So this one on the left is saying that basically 86% of people in Hollywood writers' rooms are white people. And then this one down here on the bottom talks about how 65% of Hollywood writers' rooms have no Black writers at all. So 65% have no representation of Black people in writers' rooms, which is just a pity. These are not the numbers that we want to see. So there's a lot of movement to try to move things forward, but still waiting. I'm turning over now to talk a bit about the strike. And interestingly, these issues, though these seems like they would be good reasons to strike, these are not the issues right now for the strikers. Though perhaps it should be, because what they have found is that audiences truly favor shows with diverse writers' rooms, that in fact diverse writers' rooms make more money and have better appreciation from audiences. So this quote is, amongst households of all races in 2019-20, scripted broadcast shows earning highest ratings were those in which people of color made up 31 to 40% of the credited writers. So perhaps writers should strike to have, perhaps inclusion numbers to make sure that 31 to 40% of writers' rooms were people of color, because that is not only equitable, but it also seems to result in audience favor and greater appreciation than rooms that are all white. But anyway, that's not what's currently at stake in the strike. Let me tell you a little bit more about what is. So basically the big issue is streaming and the sort of economics and politics around what is this new issue of streaming. The WGA negotiates their contract with the AMPTP, which I'll talk more about later, every 3 years. So 3 years prior, they tried to get some better negotiations happening around streaming prices, but it was the middle of COVID. So nobody was negotiating too hard because everything was up in the air and people just wanted to sort of figure out how to be as safe as possible moving forward. Well, now that sort of moment of lockdown is ended and it's time to talk more seriously about streaming. This is a good way to sort of visualize the importance of streaming in the general field of media and television production right now, in terms of the sort of total viewing of human beings over 2 years of age. So this is 3 years to 100 and whatever years old. 39% of the TV viewed is on cable, 25% is on broadcast TV, 26% is on streaming. They've even been able to break it down more specifically: Netflix, YouTube, Hulu, Prime, Disney, and then another 9% from others. So this has really changed the role of writers. Talk some more about that. So the Writers Guild of America is the union that represents writers. It was established in 1954 when two other unions for writers merged together. Those had been around since at least the 1930s. It's two unions that work together in a united way: the Writers Guild of America West, which is all the LA folks; the Writers Guild of America East, which is all the New York folks. The Californians have about 20,000 members. They cover a lot of major TV, comedy, and drama. The East is a lot smaller with only 5,000 members. It's a lot of late night TV out here, comedy shows, some reality TV, stuff like that. These are, of course, not the only unions in Hollywood. Hollywood is full of unions. Here are just a few of them. There's also the Directors Guild of America, who work on TV and film as directors. SAG-AFTRA, the actors. IATSE, a really powerful union of stagehands, started in theater, then moved to film, carpenters and technicians. And then the Teamsters. So we think of the Teamsters as driving trucks and doing other trade elements around theatrical production. Love the Teamsters. Strikes, of course, in the United States are how conditions for workers are often improved through the work of labor organization and strikes. For those of you who don't remember this from US American history, what is it? APUSH, American history, AP American history, or whatever it is you take. Here's a little reminder of some of the biggest strikes in US history, mostly working for better wages and better conditions. We sometimes say things like, strikes, what brought you the weekend? The 40-hour working week. when these organizations, so when these organizations are striking, they're striking against sort of the railroad bosses or the mine bosses. When Hollywood is striking, they're often striking against, sort of against or in opposition to the conditions. They are striking in opposition to the conditions being given by the Association of Motion Picture and Television Producers, and this is essentially the representatives from all of the major media corporations, as well as more recently streaming studios, who negotiate sort of jointly together with these different unions in order to set contracts for salaries, health insurance, minimum labor expectations, et cetera. So striking is a tried and true part of Hollywood. And since sort of the creation of Hollywood, strikes have been a part of it. This is a 1945 strike that was put on actually by the set decorators for better conditions. It ended up being nicknamed Bloody Friday because of some really intense police brutality that took place. One thing I love about this picture is that there's strike information in multiple languages, because Hollywood has always been a place where a lot of immigrants would come to work and labor. Here's another interesting strike picture from a 1960 actors strike, which was negotiated by, at some point, to become President Ronald Reagan. So that's him there in the center, not with the spotted tie, but with the dark suit. Ronald Reagan, prior to becoming president of the United States, was president of the SAG, Screen Actors Guild, so was part of these negotiations before later going on to be pretty opposed to union stuff. I couldn't find a good infographic, so I made this one myself. Take a moment and just check out some information about Hollywood strikes over time. I put the WGA strikes in red so you could see other times in which writers have gone on strike over the past. So yes, I said before, strikes are, work slowing, work stoppage, work interruption in order to get the attention of those who are pulling the strings so that you can get better opportunities to, have a happy life, whether that's higher income or better work conditions. And one thing that you notice in these strikes is that this is sort of how a lot of the protections were won in the first place. Also, interestingly, a lot of the WGA strikes specifically have intersected with developments in technology. Essentially, technology changes and then new negotiations have to be undertaken in order for writers to get a fair cut of the profit. So the 1985 strike, as you can see here, the new information was the new technology was the VCR. Once we got to 1988, cable was coming around. Each of these new modes of transmission of technological, assistance for stories meant new questions about how the money being made would come back to in this case, writers, but also actors, set decorators, how the money would come back to their pocket. So the big question right now, of course, is streaming. Each of these times, one of the big questions that comes up is residuals. Writers, as I'll say later, rely on residuals for the money that they're able to make from their work. So the big question is, why are they striking today compared to these other times? A big element is financial equity. They feel like they are not being paid enough or respected enough financially for the amount of labor that they're doing. They're specifically opposed to these things called mini rooms. So essentially the companies, the studios are, instead of having a long writing process where the full season can get developed, as in the pictures we saw at the beginning of this talk, they're insisting on very short mini rooms in which showrunners with the minimal amount of other staff writers are being sort of squeezed into producing as much content in a small amount of time as possible. This is connected to the second thing that strikers are resisting, which is the shrinking of minimum contracts. So right now, the minimum contract for WGA gigs is 13 weeks, which really isn't that long. It's 13 weeks is just, about 3 months, less than 3 months of stable work. The corporations are trying to shrink those contracts to be down to just a week or even a few days, and giving a lot of instability to what was already a somewhat unstable field. The other thing is the writers are being excluded from the rehearsal and shooting process. In this trying to shorten the amount of time that they have to be paid, they're not being invited to actually be on set and participate in some of the rewrites that often come with being a part of the production process. And so advocating to try to regain some of those norms that hadn't been codified within the policy of the WGA, but had been sort of operating procedure is part of the goal of this current strike. One of the signs that I said that I saw that I think is a good explanation of this is the idea of don't Uber writing, don't turn writing into the sort of Uber or Lyft career that rather than being a sort of sustainable ongoing one becomes a sort of gig economy. That's one of the critiques of what the studios are trying to do. Another question is there's a bit of a sort of new man in town, new person in town when it comes to the big tech corporations. It used to be that the suits negotiating the deal around the table every 3 years during this bargaining session were from Disney, Warner Brothers, Paramount, essentially entertainment companies who, even though they wanted to stretch the dollar as far as they could and give the shareholders as much as they could, they also understood that talent was what made their businesses possible. One of their critiques of having companies like Apple and Amazon in the room is that these tech companies don't have any kind of emotional alliance to entertainment or arts or storytelling, and that they think of content as just one of many income streams that they are managing. And certainly in the world of contemporary new media, social media, content is something that social media and tech companies don't want to pay for. There's a lot of content creators doing that work for free out there. Couldn't we get, volunteer content creators to write our TV shows? Or of course, as is also in negotiation right now, couldn't we get AI to write our TV shows? So another 3 important reasons we can think about for why writers are striking today is about the future of the industry of writing for television and film as a sustainable field. One of the big critiques of the tech companies is a lack of data transparency in the streaming numbers. So they won't tell writers how many people are streaming their shows. This affects their understanding of their residuals and how much they might come to be paid later for the work. Streaming companies also seek subscribers, not sort of individual eyeballs. So Paramount or NBC, they really want to have a hit show like Seinfeld or The Simpsons that will go on for a long period of time that will bring eyeballs back to their stations and then in turn, give money to the advertisers and keep a kind of brand loyalty on their channels. But streaming companies like Netflix and Amazon actually make more money every time they get new subscribers. So rather than sustaining relationships with longer shows, they might churn through TV shows to bring on new subscribers who have new specialties or interests. Yeah, and finally, as I mentioned before, the AMPTP refuses to discuss with writers the practices or protocols for AI usage more than once a year, and the writers believe it deserves more serious conversation than that. These are some of the sticking points in negotiation. One of the questions about salary that often comes up is, aren't screenwriters making a lot of money? Aren't they being greedy by wanting more money for the work that they already do? In fact, screenwriters are very often not making a lot of money. It's an incredibly competitive field to get into in the first place, which means that some people will just scrape by for years, living as cheaply as they can, trying to get in, trying to get a chance, trying to get their foot in the door, while often juggling many other jobs in the first place, sometimes paying off student debt, and also working for free or for under rate prior to joining the union in the first place. So once you've gotten into the union, it's a sign that you've already had sort of some opportunity and success in the first place. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting much money at all. It's a very biphasic field. Some people writing and producing for TV make a lot, but many, many, many people make very, very little. So that's difficult to average what the sort of average salary would be for a screenwriter, especially because, as I mentioned before, they're often 13-week contracts. To be a member of SAG who receives health insurance, you must make at least $41,773. So think of trying to live on that much in LA or New York. That's the sort of bottom threshold for keeping health insurance. And writers are often just, trying to aim over that. It's really boom or bust. You can have a big hit and have some success, but then have very little for the rest of the year. And you'll still have to pay some taxes on the income that you have had. Add into that the cost of living in Los Angeles or New York City, and the fact that you don't, as a writer for TV, get royalties the way you would for a book or a play. Instead, you get residuals that have to be sort of calculated by the companies that may themselves not have a lot of initiative to want to pay you a bunch in the first place. By a lot of labor scholars understand the deal that was struck about residuals in the 1988 contract with the unions to have been significantly on the side of studios. So many people think of writers today as having been kind of ripped off a little bit ever since the 80s when it came to residuals on cable. And now that same sort of rip-off function seems to be extending through the streaming question. And then on top of all of that, writing for TV is a very precarious employment. You can be kicked off at any time. The rooms themselves, while collaborative and fun, are also very hierarchical and normative. So sometimes people feel like they have to stay quiet in order to keep their job. And with all these other things added on top of it, it's really important that even if we think of screenwriters as part of a kind of like elite Hollywood regime, we understand that at the end of the day, they're laborers. And it's very, very hard to be funny if you're afraid that you're going to lose your job, or that the studio that you're working with is going to sort of cut off your community in a writer's room, or not give you the residuals that you deserve if you end up finally having a hit one day. So for all of those reasons and more, I think it's important that we support strikers. When it comes to AI, I wanted to uplift the words of Sierra Teller Ornelas, who's the showrunner for the TV show Rutherford Falls. And Sierra says, "My problem with AI is that it's a regurgitation of everything that's come before us. So if you're looking at Native American representation, that's fucking terrifying, because whatever it bleep blurbs out is not going to be anything close to something that me or all the Native writers that I've hired or worked with can offer. When it comes to writing that's specific, it bothers me that right when brown people get a chance to start making shit and be in charge is right when the robots come. It makes me so angry that everyone thinks this is innovation when it just feels like the same thing that we always have to deal with." I think that's a really important thing for us all to consider as the AI revolution moves forward. Finally, this is sort of churning up from the meme world, so I just thought I would share it. Money is certainly being made in streaming TV. Warner Brothers CEO David Zaslav made $250 million last year. And then here on the right is a meme that was circulating in the WGA world about similarly huge salaries from Hollywood's CEOs. So yeah, these 8 guys here made, that much money in annual salary. Meanwhile, many of the workers can't afford rent, and this is one of the reasons that they're considering striking. I wanted to end with these pictures. I had the opportunity to visit some of the WGA East picket lines at Netflix and Silvercup Studios out in New York City. Had a great time seeing up close these really dedicated writers. Writers are often very shy. They don't like to come out and have to walk around in the hot sun. One of my favorite signs was this guy behind me on the left. Sorry, these are terrible pictures of me. It's hard to do it out there in the bright sun. But the guy behind me has a great sign that says "Spread the wealth," and I really feel like that's what we're asking for. I said I was going to talk about the past, present, and future. I've talked about the past and present. Don't have too much to say about the future, except that in the next week or so, we should know if SAG-AFTRA, the actors union, will also be going on strike. This will affect whether TV shows will go forward, and it'll certainly affect the negotiation moving forward between the Writers Guild and the AMPTP. And then finally, once they're in negotiations, if you want to stay abreast of what's going on, here are a couple of handles that you can follow on Instagram and Twitter, probably other modes as well, to learn more. Thank you so much, and I would love to field questions through email or other modes. Thanks for taking the time to listen. Bye-bye.